Well, let's go ahead and get started. It's a couple minutes after 6:30, which is early for our meetings, but this is a library that we don't open until 10. It's only open to 9. That's what's driving this. If you haven't done so already, there's snacks in the back, there's sign-in, there's waters. Help yourself, please. And my name is Carl Falstick. I'm one of the co-leads for the Northwest Suburbs Organizing for Action / Indivisible Fiscal and Economic Issues group. Our other co-lead, David, can't make it tonight. And we're going to do a very abbreviated presentation on the federal budget and economic issues tonight before we have our featured speaker, who you all came for anyhow, Ralph Martiri, to talk about the Illinois budget, the pension issues, and the fair tax. So what the fiscal group does, we want you to understand the facts, use those facts to sharpen your arguments, and communicate to your audience, whatever that is, your friends, people you blog with on Facebook, or comments on various articles, things like that. So that's what we're about. See if I can find the advance the slides thing. Let's go to the federal budget. As most of you know, the federal budget operates on a fiscal year, which is October 1st to September 30th. So we're currently in fiscal year 2020, although we have not yet passed any appropriations bills for fiscal year 2020. What we did was at the end of September, we passed continuing resolutions in Congress that were signed by President Trump that extended the funding for the government through November 21st, which is, about a week and a half away. If we don't extend the funding beyond November 21st, we're looking at another partial government shutdown and all the things that can mean. The good news is this slide shows from the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget. In August, we suspended the debt ceiling. So the government is not going to default on our debt, and we won't have a financial crisis caused by that. That's much more catastrophic than a partial government shutdown. But November 21st is the date for needing to fund the government appropriations. And there's a few other issues here. If anyone who's on my mailing list should have gotten these slides, anybody who, you can also pull them off of the link that's on the RSVP link, if you'd like copies. But if you sign the sign-up sheet and back, I'll email them out tomorrow. So historically, we've run a lot more deficits than surpluses. Way back there in fiscal year 1969, Lyndon Johnson's last budget year, we ran a surplus. Then we ran deficits until the end of the Clinton years. But every other year we've run deficits. The biggest deficits before the Great Recession were during the recession of 81, 82. And then the big deficit line, the lowest one, is George W. Bush's last budget year, fiscal year 2009, October 1st, 2008 to September 30th, 2009. What we see is the budget deficits got lower for a period of time, then they started to come up. This is an August update, and so it showed the fiscal year 2019 projecting to have a $960 billion deficit. It actually came in as a $984 billion deficit. So that's where we're at, and all projections are that we will have a deficit over $1 trillion next year, or the current budget year. Any questions, any thoughts? Feel free to speak up. This is a comparison of where we are actually on the federal budget deficit for the President Trump's fiscal budget years, fiscal years 2018 and 2019, compared to a forecast back in January 17 that said, where does the Congressional Budget Office think the budget deficit will be if there are no policy changes under Trump and the Republican Congress? And so what we see is that in fiscal year 2018, that projection, that forecast was for a $487 billion deficit. We actually had a $779 billion deficit, or $292 billion higher. And then in fiscal year 2019, that $984 billion deficit I talked about versus a forecast of 601 for an increase in the budget deficit of $383 billion, primarily as a result of policies that have been instituted under the Trump administration. The big one being the tax bill of at the end of 2017, which is adding about $300 billion a year to the budget deficit. And then also spending is increasing. The Republicans insist on increasing military spending, and the Democrats insist that if we're going to increase military spending, we're going to also increase domestic spending by a comparable amount. And so the budget deals that were in place, now going back to fiscal year 2017, which was President Obama's last budget year, there the budget deficit was projected at $559 billion when President Trump took office. It ended up at $665 billion, or about $106 billion higher. But when the CBO looked at it, it was primarily revenues that were short, not any big spending, and there weren't any big tax cuts in that year. So they weren't really sure why there was, for most of that increased deficit, they weren't really sure what was the cause of it. My speculation is that if you're anticipating a tax cut in next year and the rates will be lower, you're going to manage your income to defer it to the next year. And so what you ended up doing was people that had the ability to do that went ahead and deferred some of their income from fiscal year 2017 to fiscal year 2018 so that it would be taxed at a lower rate. I mean, my moves from 2017 to 2018 didn't affect the fiscal year. I just prepaid some property taxes, so I didn't get caught under the limits on property taxes. But this is, so we've had roughly 60% increases in the budget deficit under Trump versus where we would have been with no policy changes. And as a result of that, we've had some decent growth in the economy. So this is, again, from the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget, breakdown of what has caused the increases in the budget deficit. And you'll see the blue bar is the tax cuts. The orange bar is the budget deal for fiscal year 2018, and the more reddish bar is the deal for 2019, which affects fiscal year 2020. So you see where we expect to be a little bit over $1 trillion deficit for the next couple of years, absent any new spending or tax cuts. And this is just a comparison of the 2 years. We offer it and let you take a look at it at your leisure, unless you have questions on it. This is comparison of not from the forecast for 2018 or 2019, but just comparing the 2 years, how things increased.
Hey, Carl.
Yes.
So when the tax bill was passed, if I remember right from all the information I read on it, there was an expected lift to the economy that would actually pay for that decrease in corporate taxes. contributions. Has that happened? I can see some of the 2019 versus 2018.
The better comparison would be go back and compare it to 2017, and you'd see it's dropped like a rock. But some of the Republicans said that the tax cuts will either partially or fully pay for themselves, and that has not happened because we're seeing the deficits increase in a major way. We're seeing, the $300 billion in tax cuts and a $300 billion increase in the deficit. So we're not seeing it. If you remember, President Trump in either November or December of 2017 said if he got his tax bill passed, we'd see real GDP growth of 4% or higher. We have not seen real GDP growth of 4% or higher. We have not seen real GDP growth of 3% or higher, except in a few quarters. And we'll see a slide on that in a couple of seconds. Question back there.
Just looking at your chart, I can see where it says that the estate tax went down, which I guess was expected. But it looks like corporate income tax went up, which I thought was actually not going to happen.
Again, this is a comparison from 2 years that had the same tax code.
Oh, it's the same tax code.
So you have to really look. The comparison to see the drop in the corporate income tax revenue is back to fiscal year 2017, or the forecasts done back then for 2018 and 2019 without policy changes. But it's a good question. So
That's fine. So the customs duties, is that the tariffs?
Yeah, customs duties are the tariffs, so that's one thing that's gone up. We are seeing a rise in tariffs. Yeah, Paul.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think one of the things that economists have expertise in is also return on investment.
Somewhat, more finance, but yeah.
So are there things that maybe, this is sort of a rabbit trail, but are there things at the national level that we are spending money on that have less of a return on investment that maybe we should reconsider?
We really don't look at government spending as a return on investment like you would on a corporate. What's the return of housing a homeless person? What's the return on feeding someone? Getting them health care. You don't have the same kind of ability to do a return on investment calculation. And so it's kind of a calculation that you don't want to try and run the government as a business.
Perhaps, but there might be different ways of housing the homeless people, some of which are more efficient and productive than others. You might, for the same amount of money, house more people, or you might end up with these homeless people not becoming homeless after a period of time with one plan versus another. So there might be some things one can do.
Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
Well, there are plenty of programs just like that going on all over the state and all over the country. For example, in the south suburbs, they built a home for the homeless. It's a building for the homeless. They take a lot of people off the street. They get an efficient, effective way to do it. The other thing they realize is all over the state, there are far fewer state employees today than there were when Blagojevich came into office. You go to any office downtown, any state office, there's way fewer people. At the county level too, Maureen Patton, the county treasurer, has tremendous headcount because taxes are not infinite and they make the best bang for the buck. So in theory, you can say it makes sense, in practice, it's happening every day.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions on this chart before I go on? Okay. The thing I look at in terms of economic, data, for the most part, is jobs, which is really more Main Street. I don't get terribly concerned from a policy standpoint about cranking up the stock market, or even to a certain extent, real GDP growth. I think, people on Main Street are more concerned about, do you have a job, and what's it, how much are you earning off that job? So what we've got here is, we can see where, and again, the bottom scale is at 128 million jobs, so we're not starting at, it's not a zero scale. But that was the peak pre the dot-com bust, to more jobs than that before the Great Recession. And then since in the recovery of the Great Recession, we've achieved all-time highs on jobs. We achieved it overall in May 2014, and pretty much every month since then is a new all-time high on jobs. So when President Trump celebrates that we have an all-time high on jobs this month, it's true. And we've been doing it for 5.5 years. You can see where we were at in January of 17 when President Trump took office, and we've continued to add jobs. If you look carefully at the lines between, May 14 and January 2017, and then beyond that, you'll see there's a slightly higher upward slope between May 14 and January 17 than after that, but not by a lot. I mean, what that means is we were adding a few more jobs per month before Trump took office than since Trump took office. And this is looking at it on a 6-month rolling average of job creation. What you can see is that we were actually starting to go down. I don't know if you can read the dates, but started to go down in late 2016. We continued to trend down throughout 2017. In 2018, job growth picked up. And in 2019, it slacked off again. Arguably, the 2018 job growth would be attributable to the fiscal stimulus of an additional $300 to $400 billion of deficit spending, tax cuts and additional spending. And Keynes will tell you that you can buy growth to a certain extent for a certain period of time by running bigger deficits, and that when you're in a recession, like we were back here, you want to buy growth with bigger deficits, and you don't want to be as concerned with bringing your deficit down fast. At this point, when you're up here, buying growth is, economists differ, but a lot of economists are thinking it's not necessarily good over the long haul to have the higher debt and deficits, because you can buy growth in the short term with higher deficits, but that adds to higher debt, which tampers growth and brings it down over the medium to long term. The unemployment rate is at a very good level of 3.6%. And this is one of the things that the Trump administration likes to celebrate. The U3 rate is the rate that is typically reported. It's the people that are not working and have looked for a job in the last month or 4 weeks. I'm not sure exactly what the criteria is, but essentially 4 weeks or a month. The U6 rate is everybody in the U3 rate, but it also includes people counts as unemployed, anybody who's not working, who's looked for a job in the last year. So it picks up a lot of people that way. It also picks up millions of people who are working part-time but want a full-time job. That was a number that was 4 million and something before the Great Recession, peaked at about 9.2 million, and is back down to around 5 million. So it's come back down substantially. And that's why we're close to a record on the U6. And although we're not quite near a record on the U3, because the record's a 2.5% unemployment rate, it's about a 40 or 50 year low. So it's a good number on the U3 as well. And it's a good thing that has continued to go down since President Trump took office. Yeah, Bill.
So which of the charts are the most important, or are they equally you can see that the unemployment rate continues to go down. It's to 3.6%. But I think in reading some of the numbers in preparation for this meeting today, it looks like the number of jobs is, under Trump, is somewhere about 1.5 million less than Obama in the same period of time.
Well, it's true.
Which one should you be concerned about?
Well, I think you really want to consider both. I mean, on the one hand, candidate Trump said that if he was elected, we would add 2.5 million jobs a year. And that hasn't happened. We've added, according to the CBO published numbers, we've added about 6 million jobs in, I don't know, we're at 33 months. So that's well under the, under the prior 33 months under Obama, we'd added over 7.2 million jobs. So we're definitely seeing and that's comparable to that 2.5 million a year number. We were doing that under Obama. We're not doing that under Trump. So that was a promise that's not been met. On the other hand, if when I first heard that promise, I said, no way, because as the, unemployment rate gets reduced, at some point you do run out of people to hire, especially if you cut off the immigration stream. So, Trump's policies have, been to lower the unemployment rate at the detriment of higher job growth and higher GDP growth. So, yeah.
Well, I remember in 2016 when Trump was running, and the economic numbers were really good after 8 years of Obama, and a steady decrease in the unemployment rate, increase in the stock market. But what he used to say is, yeah, but is the average income of the American worker going up? Is the situation still the case that people are unemployed are employed because they're working 3 jobs to pay their mortgage? That's what I'm curious about.
Okay, a couple of different things. Number one, it's true that wages did not go up very quickly during this period of time where we had high unemployment because it was not a very tight job market. It was an employer's market where you could go out and find people, qualified people, for not a lot of money. I mean, I knew, lawyers who were licensed in the state of Illinois getting hired at $25 an hour to do contract work. On the other hand, as you come down the curves and keep adding more jobs and the unemployment rate goes down, there's upward pressure on wages. And so we are seeing wage increases at a slightly higher nominal pace now than we were seeing, and at a slightly higher real pace. However, in 2015 and 2016, after adjusting the wage increases for inflation, we actually were seeing pretty good wage increases then and lower wage increases in 2017 and 2018. And that may be my next slide or 2 slides.
Are those increases across the entire spectrum or just certain segments?
It's the ones from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, so it's payroll employees. So it does not include 1099 contract workers, but it includes pretty much every payroll employee.
Well, I think in USA Today it was talking about, well, we got the Z generation now, whatever it is, and they're 20 to 24, and they've been seeing some good bumps. And I just wonder if it applied to the older population.
I haven't really looked at it, and unfortunately, the Bureau of Labor Statistics databases are accessed through Java and Java searches, and they have a wonderful facility if you have a browser that runs Java. But pretty much every browser has taken away the ability to run Java searches. And so diving into the data like that for relative wage increases for particular segments and stuff like that, and doing your own ad hoc searches can't be done like we could do it when I first was doing these meetings back in 2013, 2014, 2015, where we did have Java-enabled browsers. It's frustrating. Okay, here's my partisan chart showing that the unemployment rate has gone from 10% at the height of the Great Recession to 3.6%, and how much of that decline was under President Obama, and how much of that decline is under President Trump. It's not licensed. If anybody in the Democratic Party wants to pick it up, feel free. If we look at inflation, what we see is that the blue line is the overall inflation rate compared to a year earlier. The red line excludes the volatile food and energy commodities. And so what we see is that for September, which is the most recent inflation data that we had when we put this together, the excluding food and energy was 2.4% inflation. The overall rate was 1.7%. So we've seen a decline, I believe, in energy prices, although I certainly haven't seen it at the gas pump in the last couple of weeks. So I think, we may see a different data when we, pardon?
I paid 22 last week. Spectacular.
Over in Rand?
Yes.
Yeah, inflation, Rand and 120, they're competing with Woodman's. Oh, I was thinking it went further south, but yeah, there's
No, the BP at Rand Quinton.
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
I live in the city. We're lucky if we can find anything under 3.
That's the city
Well,
probably.
fill up tonight before you go back.
That's the city public sector.
I added some at 265.9 because I figured they were cheaper, so I didn't fill up, but I will try and fill up after the meeting. Okay, so this is wage hikes, and again, the blue line's nominal and the red line's real. So this is what I was saying is that if you look at real wage growth in 2015 and 2016 under Obama, it was fairly high because we have low inflation. And under Trump, in 2017, 2018, real wage growth was low. Even though we had a lower unemployment rate, we had good nominal wage growth, but we had fairly high inflation. Where in 2019, with lower inflation, we're seeing a decent real wage growth.
Isn't that what he's gonna say, is his campaign pledge? Your wages are gonna go up because unemployment is so low?
Well, he may, and again, the reality
He
is,
doesn't understand economics, so he won't.
well, what they are saying now, and I don't have our slides, the Census Bureau does real median household incomes. The most recent data released in September was for 2018, and we've been seeing all-time highs in real median household incomes in 2016, 2017, 2018. The growth was higher in 2015 than in 2016, which is higher than 2017, which is higher than 2018. What the administration folks are touting now is that although the Census Bureau hasn't released their data, there's a group called Sentier Research or something like that, that is former Census Bureau people who pulled out some data and say, based on numbers in July, there's some really big growth in real median household income since Trump took office. But we will have real numbers from the Census Bureau released a couple of months before the next election, and we'll see where those end up, whether it's a fluke of what the timing of when they took a look at the numbers, or whether it's a growth. And either could be right, because really the household income is a combination of both increased wages and more people working. And we are certainly, even if the job growth isn't quite as good, we're certainly seeing more people working than we were before. But this is, going back a ways from 79 to 2016, and it's different than the way a lot of people think of the data, is what has been the growth in average household income by income quintile. And not surprisingly to anyone, the top quintile has seen the most growth in income, both before transfers and taxes and after transfers and taxes. Surprising a lot of people, they're not the only ones who've seen growth in income. That before transfers and taxes, pretty much everybody else, all the other groups, have seen a 33% increase. And once you factor in taxes and transfers, government benefits, the lowest quintile has seen an 85% growth in the average household income since between 79 and 2016. And the middle three have seen about 50% growth. Yeah, Bill.
The last slide is individual. This slide is household.
Household, yes.
Okay, and there's an average of 3.5 or something like that per household. That's right?
I don't think so.
Oh.
There's a lot of us single folks out here, or folks like you that don't have any kids at home, that bring that number down.
Okay.
We don't have, it's not like my family, which had 5 kids, and, others that were. So real GDP growth. And this is one Dave put together that said that in the first 11 quarters under Trump, it's averaged 2.6%, which is similar to what it averaged under Obama. What we see is that, actually, most of you may remember that there were a couple of times since President Trump got elected that they published real GDP growth quarters that were over 4%. What happened in July was that the Commerce Department's Bureau of Economic Analysis, which does these numbers, went back, filled in some additional data, looked at it and said, no, this is what the numbers are. So the top quarters under Trump are 3.5%. Overall, we had his best year was fiscal year 2018, which they determined was a 2.9% growth, similar to fiscal year 2015's 2.9% growth. But we had, much higher quarter growth under Obama, the 5.5% and 5% quarters compared to the 3.5%. And for anyone who's curious, the best quarterly, anybody want to take a stab at which president had the highest quarterly growth rate for a single quarter?
From the chart, it's Obama.
Not from the chart. Since we started tracking it in the late 40s.
Oh, Clinton.
Wrong?
Reagan.
Nope.
All right, I gotta guess Carter in that case.
A winner. So this is components of GDP.
Elimination.
Yeah.
Well, you had Eisenhower, you had Johnson, Kennedy. Overall, we probably, for the presidency, we had the best growth under Kennedy and Johnson. But, so when Trump talks about, and as I think I said in today's email, when you look at real GDP growth rates at 2.0 and 1.9% on quarters, this is not the booming economy that was projected by that, that tax cut, which is supposed to lead to 4+% growth. This is just components of GDP you can take a look at later, because I'm going to try and speed up for time. This is projections of GDP growth from the Federal Reserve. And the projections are slightly between June and their September forecasts. The projections went up 0.1% for annual growth because they plan to cut the federal funds rate to stimulate growth. So we're getting growth stimulus both from bigger deficits and from lower borrowing rates. And now we're going to go ahead and take a break. I want to go ahead and introduce a couple of my co-sponsors here, the Greater Palatine Area Democrats and the Illinois 6th Congressional District Democrats, for those of us that have a bad memory. And are there any candidates that are here tonight? If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and